Hi, this is the part 2. So we'll start with the observations about Genesis. Well, the first glaringly obvious one, let's see if we can find it here. I think I had the page open. Yeah, so we're on Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish," blah, 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 blah. Verse 27, "So God created man in his own image, in the image of God created he him, male and female created he them." This is nothing new. I know many channels have pointed to this, but we're going somewhere with this anyway. Then we come on to chapter 2. That's it. Chapter 2, verse 21, "And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs, closed it up, and then basically created Eve." Prior to this creation of Eve, now see, you've got two creation stories going on here, which a lot of people have pointed at. But before this creation of Eve, you've got mention on verse 17, verse 16, chapter 2, verse 16, "And the Lord God commanded the man, saying, Of every tree of the garden thou may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil thou shalt not eat, for it is the day that thou eatest thereof thou shalt surely die." I want to just go over to another passage here, if you can find the page. Psalm 139 for a start. "O Lord, thou hast searched me and know me, thou knowest me," and so on. Psalm 139, start with that first to about the fourth verse. It's basically saying it's an all-knowing, all-loving God. If you do a search, what's interesting, if you type in "God is love" and you pull up biblical, you get a list of biblical passages, which are John 3:16, John 4:19, John 3:1, Ephesians 2, verses 4 to 5. Interesting that they're all New Testaments, not a reference to anything in the Old Testament there. But Psalm 139, 1 through to verse 3 does. But this is the first observation here. This God has commanded not to eat of these two particular trees, and there's a threat that you will surely die. Does that not sound like that voice from behind the burning bush that also seems to issue commandments and make threats? So moving on now, chapter 3. "Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast." So coming down to verse 4, chapter 3, verse 4 of Genesis, "And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die from eating this fruit." And of course, Eve goes on, but hang on, let's rewind a minute here. Eve wasn't even created when this God gave this command. But just consider here the following events to that. So if we look at chapter 3, verse 22, and the Lord God said, Behold, the man is become as one of us, to know good and evil, and now lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat, and live forever. So what are we actually to make of this? To be like us. Does this imply that God, or I've seen other passages which refers to Elohim here, gods as in plural, are they to be like us? Does that imply that the us that's referred to just has a greater knowledge, in the same way that if you have a radio, you open up a whole new world to yourself, that without that radio you have no way of detecting the radio broadcasts? Or, to be like us, does that suggest that if to be like them would surely imply to do the same thing? So does that imply that these gods have eaten from these two trees? Is that the only difference? Because it seems to be an admission, if they do this, they're going to be exactly like us. Could it also be from eating from that fruit that there is a way of exiting from this construct? To be like us, to do things that we have done, it also seems to suggest practicing exclusion. It's like withholding knowledge, which obviously, if you are eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then you are starting to develop inequality with these God beings. It also would possibly suggest that dietary requirements are compatible. Seems to be further backed up when it talks on later about the sons of God coming into the daughters of men. Something that's totally compatible would seem to be exactly the same, but just with additional knowledge of something, an advantage over another. Just observations, you know. Yes, so the way the story unfolds, they eat this fruit. They then discover or recognize that they are naked. It's a metaphor to say they have realized who they are. They have become self-aware, self-conscious. Hence this sort of symbolic representation of covering themselves with a fig leaf. From that also you could say, if Adam is looking at Eve and Eve is looking at Adam, and they're comparing in this reality and seeing they're not the same, they have slightly different body plans, one male, one female. But they've eaten from this fruit from this tree of knowledge of good and evil. That implies their eyes have been opened. That implies, surely in that instance, the question that I would ask is, well, why didn't they straight away eat from the other tree as well? Also, how did Eve know? Was it Adam that told her not to eat? We've been commanded not to do this, or that's not actually mentioned in this text at all. It's like there are things missing. It's deliberately confused because it is a book of knowledge of good and evil, because it is more than one story playing out here. But what do they do with this knowledge of good and evil? It seems quite a strange thing. They run and hide. Why? What are they? Why are they hiding? What has made them afraid? What did they see? This comes back. I can answer this quite easily. To use an archaic term, and this comes into this thought exercise, what you will see is harrowing. I repeat that. What you will see is harrowing. It's not going to be something dressed up and look pretty. But there's a very good reason for doing this. It really confirms who you are. Because if you feel yourself to be a being of light, something in this realm, and it's on that Shining Woman tarot card in the Shining Woman deck, where the heart is like scales. It's about balance. It's the knowledge of good and evil. See, the serpent didn't lie. The serpent was actually honest. He said, eat the fruit, surely you won't die. It's not surely you won't die as in a question, it's a statement of you can be certain that you're not going to die from eating this fruit. To put it in another way, using a Wagnerian way of explaining it, if we start with that opening chord of the epic ring cycle, which is basically exactly the same story in 4 evenings as in the entire Bible, with the same revelation at the end of it as such. But it opens with a chord of E flat major, and without the serpent coming in, as it were, you would be stuck on E flat major. There would be no development, because that music morphs into representing the river, the Rhine, and the flow. So it would impede the natural flow of things. So the tempter, or another word, it would be the trickster. Let's just examine the story here, because it's so easy to, the trickster, oh, the devil, evil, negative, and such like. But just think about this. When we put it in terms of the story of the Anunnaki, and Enki warns humanity of what is going to happen, that there's a reset coming. Breaks pattern, you could say. And is referred to as the trickster. But from what perception is that trick negative? Would you say it's negative from a human perception? Because I don't see it as being so. I see it as a necessary act for the play to unfold on the world stage. So, like I said, fire has a duality to it, or a perception of duality. One, it is destructive, and two, it leads to new creation, a reset, a rising of the phoenix from the ashes of the old. So this is where we can now put this in a modern day setting. So the adversary is actually inside. Now, I'd like you to try this as a thought exercise. If you see yourself as being on the side of light, Therefore, from that, you are very much over to one side and out of balance. It might seem rather strange, but to really know yourself requires knowing your Loga side and your Loki side as well. Now, there is a way of doing this without actually doing it. Now, the key, and I emphasize the real key to this, is beyond the actual question that you initially ask, is to not put conscious thought, allow it to come into the mind's eye as pictures, and it is harrowing what you may see. It'll depend up on your constitution, your makeup inside yourself. But to bring things in balance, to gauge and find where you are within the sphere of the light, also requires to find the polar opposite of that, and how far are you in the darkness. That is only your shadow, of course. The shadow is just like in this physical realm. It cannot do anything of itself. It's in the action of you. So, one of these virtual realities where you can do anything, no comeback, or seemingly, I will say at this point, no comeback, because it would have implications and will have implications if you enter into that virtual reality and you start living more in that one than in this one. It's about being present, and part of it, that being present, is finding the balance and is recognizing that shadow self. So what I would like you to do is get yourself in a comfortable position, a sort of like a meditative state, and just ask the question, if I go into this virtual reality and I can be anything I want to be and do anything I want to do because there is no comeback, or seemingly there is no comeback to this, and that is exactly what it does lead to. There is no comeback. That's why I said there are some doors that are a door to a Pandora's box. And what you possibly could see is harrowing. You don't actually have to step into it. You can actually see... The way I would describe it is, if you see... It's basically going to look red. But in the middle of that is a white circle. And if you penetrate right to the back of that, you will see a black sun. You could say it's a thrilling experience. It's if you can do anything, it's a temptation. Think of all the things that you are and what you consider morally right. But now you have an opportunity to do all the things you are not. That is the harrowing shadow side. That is why Adam and Eve hid in that story. It's not the way it is portrayed. It's because they've disobeyed a commandment. It's because the knowledge of good and evil, they now recognize this God is a shadow. It's not the real God. It is a trickster. Because the evidence is in its own words. Thou shalt not eat from the tree of these two trees, because you will die. There's a threat comes with it. Does that sound like an all-loving God? And of course, after this eating of the fruit, this God. Now I thought, as I understood it, going with Psalm 139:13, there's actually another one to that as well, which makes a 14. The phalanges, the digits in the 3 digits in each finger and 2 in the thumb, the 14. The pi angles, the lights. The knowledge of good and evil was so shocking to Adam and Eve in that story. Well, wouldn't you hide when you realise that this God, and also proves that it is a false God, because it says in the story, where are you? Well, I thought God was all-knowing. So how come God doesn't know where Adam and Eve are? Interesting, huh? But yeah, just do that as a thought exercise. I wouldn't dwell there too long. You meet your shadow side, because consider, if you are so far in the light, you have a shadow side that must be therefore so far in the dark. This comes also back to what I spoke about with energy. You're putting energy into that virtual world. It's only a matter of time before Ahriman finds an algorithmic realization and does actually come out. I have an idea of when it's going to come out, because it'll be something reflected in the sky. If you're going to really press me for a date, I would say November of 2046, but time will tell. But like I say, it's not going to be a pleasant experience when you see your shadow side. It can be quite shocking. It certainly helps to have that recognition, because you can then carry that arc, as it were. It's expressed as like a black cube, and especially something you'll be able. It's there. It's part of you, but you're in control of it. It goes back to that Matthew 4:1-11. It's the 9. It's a completion, because you've recognized and taken responsibility and acknowledged what is actually inside you, inside all living beings. There is a knowledge of good and evil to be found, but is it such a bad thing if you can find the balance between the two, and you know which door not to open? And by not opening that door actually does open another door. The 14 is also significant in that you could say 12 zodiac signs around the sun, which is going to give you 13, and then beyond that would make you 14, or you could do it on the including a fucus, and then it's something beyond the fucus, which would also give you 14, but it's played out in 1 plus 4 as 5 senses. Like I say, if you do that thought exercise, don't do it from a thinking point of view. Again, it's reference, God is closer than you think. You won't find it that way. That would be going down the route of intelligence, which is finite, that actually stops. It will prevent you from going further. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to cover on this? I think that's about all of it, but I can't remember which video now I mentioned about the Rudolf Steiner, but I would recommend listening to that to help you find yourself, to help you go through a reformation of oneself inside oneself, so the head actually becomes another sensory organ which actually serves you rather than leading you towards the shadow side of yourself. It's about finding that balance between the two. The knowledge of good and evil is not a bad thing. And it looks like very much that the partaking of it, when done from a higher perspective, is also not a bad thing. But isn't it interesting how Adam and Eve don't partake in this knowledge of good and evil and automatically go to the tree of life and eat from that? I feel it is because in that story they were in shock because what they actually saw was their shadow side. I feel that story plays out, and I feel this is a good way of doing it, of actually using the idea of the virtual reality and what is, if you step through into that doorway, where it will lead, what you could find out, what you could do. All potentials, but all just purely virtually. But there would come a point where it could spill out into this reality. But if you can see where it will ultimately lead, you really don't want to go there at all. That's all I'm going to say on it, because I don't... Will it be interesting to see, can the AI read people's minds? Does it already know? I know how I could pull Aramon out into this physical reality. Time will tell on that. But it wasn't from thinking, it flashed in the mind. In fact, what may seem initially unrelated, the whole idea of going into a virtual reality where you can do anything you want, I could liken to the image that I actually got. It was a Stalin's annual parade, and it's like, I've never seen so many red flags, is what you take from that. That is like the intuition off the scale saying, don't even go there. And I know, based purely on past experience, when that inner voice says, do not do that, see, there's a subtle difference between a command of thou shalt not, and I wouldn't recommend doing that from the internal voice. That's why that you get the sensations. It's tuning into the sensations. That is something Rudolf Steiner talks about in the lecture. I'll put the link in the description to both, because it's a part 1 and 2 to this video. And wow, this has gone to half an hour. Again, I hope it's not too convoluted. I hope it's given you a few things to weigh up about these texts, in the same way that, look at the way the word wireless has morphed from something that refers to just an ordinary household radio into more associated with technology of today. How just the way we hear the word wireless or wireless, that subtle change, and what then comes up from the way you hear the word as well, that's something else to weigh up. But also consider all these numbers of these chapters and verses, and like the Matthew 41 to 411. The number 14. It's not the only protocol being run. There's an S10, which is basically SOL 0 and 1 being reversed, because again, this simulation, this reality, everything flips over, so light becomes shadow, but actually flips over and appears as light, because it's not light, it is illumination. It is not the light, but again, I refer you to that Rudolf Steiner link as a way to grasp the big difference between spiritual sun and physical sun, as it were, and I'll leave that with you. So, as always, unconditional love to you all. Sorry this has been rather long-winded. If you wish to get in contact, if I can help you in any way, details and what I offer are in the description. So until the next video, unconditional love to you all.